Amitabha. Having resolved to walk every morning for a week, Phyllis Rodriguez set out on a beautiful autumn morning in New York City. Upon returning to her apartment building, she was met by a porter who told her that the World Trade Center was on fire. Running up the stairs to her apartment, she turned on the TV to see what looked like a terrible accident. A plane was embedded into the side of the burning North Tower. While people worldwide watched in horror, Phyllis had a personal reason to be horrified. Her son, Greg, worked in the North Tower. As he watched the TV, a second plane crashed into the South Tower. It was not an accident. Listening to her answering machine as she watched the live reporting on TV, she heard a message from Greg saying there had been an accident at the Trade Center, but he was okay. Phyllis, her husband Oliver, and Greg's wife anxiously waited for Greg to make his way to his wife's workplace in Midtown Manhattan. But he never arrived. Their wait continued the next day. That evening, an announcement was made. It was officially assumed that all those not accounted for had died in the attack. Greg was one of the almost 3,000 people who perished in the tower's collapse. 2 days later, in France, Aisha Al-Wafi received a call from her daughter. She told her mother that the television stations were reporting that her brother was thought to have been involved in the New York attack. Aisha barely recognized the changed appearance of her son, Zacharias Musawi, as she watched the various reports. Friends spoke to her, assuring her that she wasn't to blame. But how could she, as the mother who had brought him into the world, not blame herself? Some weeks later, Aisha received a letter from her son. Zacharias wrote that yes, he was an Islamic extremist, but he had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks. Aisha found herself torn between her love for her son, whose troubled life had led him to become an extremist, and her sorrow at the suffering of all those who had lost loved ones in the attacks. She hoped to meet with some members of the victims' families to express her deep sorrow for their suffering and to apologize. 2 months after the terrorist attack, Zacharias was charged with 6 felonies related to the attacks, for which the U.S. Attorney General wanted the death penalty. Several months later, an apprehensive Aisha flew to New York to meet with a small group of family members of the victims. They would be joined by some people experienced in similar reconciliations. Accompanied by the human rights interpreter who had come with her, Aisha nervously entered the room. Looking around, she saw Phyllis. Drawn to one another, the two mothers embraced and cried for a long time. After everyone had an opportunity to introduce themselves, they all sat down around the conference table. Aisha showed photos of Zacharias when he was young and spoke of how he had never felt like he belonged in France. Reviled as an Arab and a foreigner, he had been subjected to racist abuse. She also spoke of her own youth, of her having been married at age 14, losing her first child at 15 and the second at 16, and of how she loved France and its welcoming citizens after arriving there at age 17. Next, the others at the table shared memories of family members who had perished in the attack. Knowing the U.S. Attorney General would be seeking the death penalty, they apologized that the United States still had the death penalty in the penal code. Sitting together and talking, everyone in this small group became increasingly aware of their mutual humanity. The gathering came about because Aisha, out of the spirit of generosity, had put aside thoughts of her lost son to listen to grieving family members speak of their loss of their loved ones who went to work on a sunny autumn day, never to return home. She showed that someone who suffers immense loss can be emotionally generous toward others and wish to ease their suffering, not just her own. This sentiment brought together the people in the room. As Phyllis later said, quote, "Since then, I've learned that one way to heal is to bridge the gap between ourselves and the other." A Moroccan Muslim woman living in France and a secular Jewish woman living in the United States are no different when it comes to suffering. End quote. In 2005, Zacharias pleaded guilty to all 6 counts against him regarding the attack. At his sentencing, he admitted knowing about the planned Twin Towers attack and that he was supposed to fly a plane into the White House. The jury had a choice after his guilty plea: death by lethal injection or life in prison without the possibility of parole. They recommended life in prison. Phyllis watched the trial and was heartbroken for Aisha, her friend, and another mother who had lost her son. Phyllis explained that previously she had felt a somewhat removed empathy for all parents who had lost their children. But after Greg's death, her understanding became much deeper as she realized that all parents are the same. When we search for answers as to why someone would take the life of a stranger, we may find ourselves examining the person's upbringing and current conditions. In the case of Zacharias, people looked at his childhood and teenage years. With no father in the picture, they only had his mother as the closest family member to point a finger at. Perhaps Aisha had abused him, failed to teach him properly, Maybe she had fostered a burning hatred for non-Muslims that she had inculcated into her son. But learning about her, we see a mother who did her best in challenging circumstances to teach her children to love their adopted country, respect others, and be responsible. And so, hoping to provide others with some answers, a year after the attack, she went to New York to face some of the family members of the victims. Courageously walking into the room, she had found herself drawn to Phyllis. As Phyllis would later say, they were the same, two mothers mourning their loss. This shared grief and an acute awareness of the prevailing mood of the people in the United States led Phyllis to dread the national reaction. She remembered how quickly anger had been directed at Muslims after the 1995 bombing of the Murray Federal Building in Oklahoma City. A bombing that turned out to have been committed not by a Muslim terrorist, but by a domestic terrorist of European descent. But until he had been arrested, and even after, the anger against those merely thought to be Muslim had been frightening. Now, after Zakaria said he was loyal to Osama bin Laden and belonged to Al-Qaeda, and the Al-Qaeda identities of the hijackers became known, many in the United States were demanding retaliation, fearing how much worse the reaction would be this time. Phyllis not only felt empathy for Aisha, who had lost her son to extremism and hatred, but was deeply concerned for all the mothers in Afghanistan and Iraq who would lose not only sons, but other loved ones as well in an increasingly aggressive war of insatiable vengeance. Phyllis's empathy developed over many years, ever since she was a teenager and saw social and political injustice. When young, she and her husband protested against the Vietnam War and participated in civil rights marches. But now, after the loss of their son, the possibility of others experiencing the same loss became much more personal and relatable. She and her husband felt increased empathy for people in Afghanistan, knowing how the United States would surely retaliate. And so, when she met Aisha, Phyllis saw not the mother of an accused extremist, but a mother who lost her son to ignorance and blind hatred. Due to her own emotional generosity and empathy, Phyllis walked up to Aisha and embraced her as one grieving mother would embrace another. Intuitively, she knew what Aisha felt and wanted to ease her pain, just as Aisha wished to ease Phyllis's. No superior, no inferior, no condescension over another, no satisfaction at their suffering. Over 20 years after the attack, Phyllis said she had still not forgiven the terrorists, but she did want to understand what motivated them. Understanding is a vital component of the process of forgiveness. Phyllis said, quote, "Forgiveness is being able to accept another person for being human and fallible. Even those who have made major mistakes come to false conclusions or committed crimes." End quote. Understanding is how we recognize a person's human fallibility, even if we cannot yet forgive them or fully accept how their fallibility resulted in their actions that hurt us or those we care about. Our understanding, partial or complete, can lead to sympathy. And with sympathy, to spiritual generosity and empathy. With these, we understand that by nature, we are the same. Beings who want to be safe, free of fear, and able to believe and live as we wish. When we empathize with someone, we no longer perceive the person we just encountered as a threatening stranger who neither loves, worships, looks, behaves, or speaks like we do. Instead, with empathy, knowing how we suffer, we can discern how others similarly suffer. We can relate to a mother mourning the loss of a child, being overwhelmed with grief, and maybe even guilt. We can empathize with a teen who acted from impulse and peer pressure rather than rationality, finding themselves with a police record. Commiserate with a parent whose addictions have overwhelmed any love for their children, and made worse by court orders restricting contact. We do not need to have experienced the same thing these people have. We can recall our past suffering, our losses, the painful consequences of our impulsive actions, our cravings, our being unfairly accused, and imagine what others are going through. As has been said, everyone's blood is red. Everyone's tears are salty. We can remember that, as Phyllis observed, every person is human and fallible. We were all born as infants, carrying with us the seeds and consequences of our past thoughts and actions, ready to absorb everything around us and be influenced by it. We can also remember that it could just as easily have been us making that terrible choice if we had found ourselves in similar circumstances. And upon considering that we have lived innumerable lifetimes since time immemorial, realize the likelihood that we have indeed made such choices, and worse. We were just more fortunate this time in the conditions we encountered. By appreciating this, we can give rise to empathy for those who weren't as fortunate as us, and for those who love them. With such understanding and empathy, even if we cannot yet forgive, we will be better able to resist the temptation to act from our own rage, hatred, and craving for revenge. Better able to act from our own generosity of spirit. Amitabha.